On March 5th, 2018, a brand new manga began serialization in Weekly Shonen Jump. That manga was Jujutsu Kaisen. Since Jujutsu Kaisen's debut, it has become a phenomenon in the anime and manga industry, having sold over 100 million volumes and becoming the best-selling manga for 3 years. I mean, heck, in 2024, the series even won a Guinness World Record for most popular anime. It truly feels like at this point, Jujutsu Kaisen is on top of the world. So then, why is it that when you look online, you're greeted with an influx of fans expressing very critical views of a series that, for the most part, is beloved by so many? While criticism of Jujutsu Kaisen isn't anything new, there always seemed to have been an underlying sense of hope that these criticisms could have been remedied in future chapters. However, ever since Jujutsu Kaisen's finale on September 30th of last year, all of those hopes have been dashed. With the release of Chapter 271, Jujutsu Kaisen is officially over, leaving many fans with a sense of emptiness and dissatisfaction upon the manga's conclusion. So, why is that exactly? Well, for a number of reasons. One of the main criticisms I've seen fans level at Jujutsu Kaisen is that many of its story elements are underdeveloped, and this is a valid complaint. After all, the reason why so many people love Jujutsu Kaisen is because they fell in love with its world and characters. So when said world and characters aren't thoroughly explored, it's incredibly disappointing. For one, there were a number of different storylines that many fans wanted to see more of, like Gojo's childhood, Toji's backstory, further exploration of the Heian era via flashbacks, and these are only a few of the many aspects of the Jujutsu Kaisen world that people wanted to see more of. An issue that could have possibly been fixed if the story had slower pacing. And this is actually one of my biggest personal gripes with Jujutsu Kaisen after watching the anime. To this day, I still think that season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen is incredible. I can absolutely understand why this show completely dominated anime discussion for as long as it did, because the first part of this anime sets up its story premise immaculately. That's why it's so weird going from that to Shibuya, because it feels like just as the status quo is being set up, it all comes crashing down. Now, I'm all for giant events that shake up a story to its core. I mean, that's why time skips are such an effective storytelling tool. However, I feel like the impact is diminished when we don't have enough time to fully get used to the status quo. And not helping things is how freaking crammed Shibuya is with plot twists and revelations. The Kenjaku reveal, Yuji's relationship with Chozo, Kenjaku's plan. There's just so much that happens at once, and it's kind of sloppy. A great example of this is when we're shown Nobara's backstory just moments before her quote-unquote death. I know this was supposed to be an emotional moment, but it honestly left me more confused than anything. Like, already we're losing one of the main trio and we're only just now learning things about her backstory? I feel as though this moment would have hit a lot harder had we known more about Nobara earlier, an issue that could have been solved with slower pacing. This ties back into people's gripes with the ending, how they felt as though certain storylines were underdeveloped by the time everything was said and done. This applies to the characters as well. By the end of Jujutsu Kaisen, many felt as though certain characters didn't live up to their full potential. The best example of this being Potential Man himself, Megumi Fushiguro. This is a character who is built up to possibly be one of the strongest characters in the story, having inherited the Zenin clan's 10 Shadows technique. Gojo himself even says that Megumi has the ability to defeat even him with this technique. I mean, Mahoraga was such a big deal in the Shibuya arc, and the viewer can't help but be excited at the prospect of Megumi taming him and making his power his own. However, the closest thing we get to this is when Sukuna utilizes Mahoraga Turaga while he's in Megumi's body. And I mean, it's cool and all, but from a storytelling perspective, it's incredibly disappointing that Megumi himself never really accomplished this. And this isn't exclusive to Megumi. There's many different characters who fans felt as though they didn't reach their fullest potential after being set up to where you think they might have, which only adds to the empty feeling that so many people had once the story ended. A lot of characters weren't able to realize their potential for various reasons, such as being sidelined in favor of more Sukuna glazing or because the story never got around to it. And at that point, the characters feel less like actual characters and more like tools to prop up other characters or just manipulate the audience emotionally. Look no further than JJK poster boy himself, Satoru Gojo. I'm not going to necessarily argue that Gojo's death was good or bad for the progression of the narrative. That really does just come down to your subjective opinion. But one thing that you can't ignore is the substantial amount of backlash surrounding Gojo's passing. Why do you think so many people were hoping and praying every time a new chapter was released to see the revival of their favorite character? Every other week, we'd see theories circulating and going viral online about his supposed comeback, and this only added fuel to the fire. Like, do you guys remember all that official art that came out where one of Gojo's eyes was deliberately covered in some way? This led to a lot of people thinking that he was gonna make a big comeback with his Six Eyes technique stifled or diminished. And this all came to a head at the end of chapter 260, when we were greeted with this panel of Gojo's supposed return from the dead. And you can only imagine the euphoria this gave to so many fans, to the point that chapter 260 became the second most read chapter on Manga Plus. That's counting all manga, period. It was a collective high felt by the community at large. People were finally seeing Gojo in the manga again, but what they weren't seeing was the finger of the monkey's paw slowly curling. In other words, yes, Gojo was back, but was he really? No, it was Yuta and Gojo's body using Kenjaku's mind-hopping technique.
That's it?
This was the salt in the already freshly gaping wound that was Gojo's death. And it was being rubbed in pretty unapologetically. Like, they knew what they were doing. They knew that this would upset people. So now we can begin to understand how dismayed people were when the final chapter was released and every last hope of a Gojo comeback was squashed. There wasn't even a funeral or any scene of his students visiting his grave, which also rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. In fact, the entire final chapter rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. For anyone who doesn't know, the final chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen primarily focuses on the main trio, Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara, investigating a disturbance caused by a cursed technique user. And it's not like this is unusual for Jujutsu Kaisen, but it is a bit odd and anticlimactic as an ending for the manga. They introduce new characters that people just don't care about. Like, people wanted to see more of the characters that had been already established, and this has been a recurring issue with the series as it approached its ending. Certain story threads would be introduced or reintroduced and naturally pique the interest of the fans, and yet they just wouldn't see any closure. And I feel like if there was any time to at least try to tie off some of these story threads, the final chapter would have been the time to do it. Yet we're just watching Yuji and the others deal with a pretty small time incident, and it's just so confusing to focus on this, you know? Granted, we do get a small flashback with Yuji talking to Gojo and a brief discussion between Sukuna and Mahito in the afterlife, but these moments are fleeting. And I feel, if anything, these were the parts of the chapter that should have been the main focus, yet they just weren't. Of course, there was also the epilogue that was released once the manga concluded, and while it's better than nothing and wasn't reviled or anything like that, it still was basically just a bonus and didn't particularly answer most of the questions people were still asking. Now, these story threads could be explored if a sequel to Jujutsu Kaisen ever comes to fruition, but the simple fact of the matter is that at no point has Gege or Shonen Jump been upfront about whether or not there will even be a sequel. This was advertised as the conclusion to the series, and thus we can really only judge it as that, the finale of Jujutsu Kaisen. And I hate to say it, everything about the ending of this manga just feels so rushed and slapped together. Almost like Gege Akutami really didn't know what he was doing. And well, there might be a good amount of truth to that statement. At the end of Jujutsu Kaisen's final volume, there's an afterword written by Gege Akutami himself. And that afterword opens with this. The product, Jujutsu Kaisen, was pissed out for 6.5 years. Nearly 7 years if you include the serialization of the special issues. And what I learned was, I really am an idiot. Gege goes on to be surprisingly transparent about the issues he experienced while writing Jujutsu Kaisen, calling himself both absent-minded and immature as a mangaka. He admits that throughout writing the manga, he lacked conviction in himself, and even still does to this day. And it's just so shocking to hear this coming from the author of one of the most popular manga of the modern day. But at the same time, well, it makes sense. Before Jujutsu Kaisen, Gege Akutami was an unknown. He didn't have any smash hits or a substantial amount of experience writing manga for a professional publisher. He was just a guy that really liked manga and drawing cool stuff. So going from that to the author of a series that was able to beat One Piece in the yearly manga sales charts, well, I can imagine that's incredibly overwhelming. And this isn't something that Gege takes lightly. He's gone on record saying that in the future he hopes to improve. And that's something I can really appreciate about him. He knows he's not perfect and he's honest about it. And regardless of how I or others feel about Jujutsu Kaisen's ending, I think Gege has achieved something incredible. He captivated so many people with this world and its characters, and honestly, despite the hiccups along the road, I'm just glad that Jujutsu Kaisen exists. It's given me and countless others so many great memories that I don't think anyone will ever forget. So I say this from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, Gege Akutami. Thank you for everything, and I look forward to whatever it is you decide to do next.